Yes, hello once again and welcome back once more to your number one classic dirt bike TV channel. And coming up in this next video posting, we're going to take a look at another bike from the superb Rob Hughes classic collection. Now, we have many more machines to feature from Rob's Museum of Motocrossers, and in this particular instance we're going to check out his 1975 500 CCM. Now, these 1975 models for me personally are one of the nicer looking CCM bikes from the Alan Clues Bolton factory, because it seems that no matter what angle you look at this bike, it just seems to look right and has that aura of a true purpose-built off-road race bike. Now, 1975 was of course the very first year that CCM fitted the laid down rear shocks to their CCM race bikes, and this fully restored example is another beauty from the Rob Hughes collection, and this is another of Rob's bikes that's been put together and refurbished by the talented hands of Eric Middleton. Now, 1975 was a pretty good year for the Bolton-based factory, and it's said that around 160 of these 1975 machines were sold in that particular year, which maybe not sound like a huge amount of bikes compared to a larger manufacturer, but to a smaller franchise such as CCM, this was certainly a decent amount of bikes to sell in one financial year, and it certainly helped CCM prepare for the coming 1976. Now, also for 1975, this BSA derived engine also underwent some modifications for that year, because the older 1974 motors were the short stroke versions that had an 88mm bore and an 82mm stroke. But it's said that when these older 1974 motors were ridden hard by the works riders, they had a tendency to be troublesome because they found that the piston was just too big in relation to the gudgeon pin, which caused the small end to wear out quite rapidly. So Alan Clues then reduced the bore and increased the overall stroke just to give him a motor with an 80mm bore and a 90mm stroke, which of course ended up with an engine of 498 cc's. Now, these two valve B50 motors were certainly awesome bits of kit for their time, and these left side engine casings would later be covered in a gold anodized colour, but because this is one of the very early 1975 bikes, this version's not had that particular treatment. But for me personally, I think this unpainted look is much better anyhow, and you can get a better look at the beautiful machining that's taken place on these alloy casings. Now, as you know, in 1975, Vic Eastwood was one of the works riders on these CCMs, and it's said that Vic had 3 different versions of this motor at his disposal. He had a big 545cc motor for the larger unlimited races, and 2 500s with different cams and engine setups for other race events. And the other 2 works riders for 1975 were of course the great Norman Barrow and of course big John Banks. Now, also for 1975, CCM ditched the old BSA forks that they were using in the previous 1974 year and then switched to a pair of metal profiles, which was slightly better, but Alan thought that these were still not good enough for his CCM bike, so Alan went ahead and designed his own forks with magnesium sliders and adjustable damping. And in this particular shot, you can see where you could alter the damping rate of the forks by adjusting this little screw on the bottom of the fork leg. But to further improve the bike's front suspension travel and operation, the top of the forks were fitted with these aluminium bottles so that the forks could accommodate longer springs and of course hold more oil which led to better overall damping and an increase in travel. And of course, to further reduce the overall weight of the bike, Alan used magnesium on some of the bike's parts, including these front and rear brake hubs. Now, as I mentioned earlier, 1975 was the very first year that CCM then switched from the conventional vertical upright rear suspension to this newer laid down configuration. Now again, these early 1975 bikes had this quite radical idea of housing the rear shock's oil inside the frame loop, which could be filled through a little plug housed here just behind the seat. Now, it's said that this was just an experiment by the Clues designers, and as far as I know, the idea never progressed any further than just being an experiment, and the idea was ditched soon after trials were conducted. But it was certainly a radical concept for 1975. Now, of course, I'm sure that you already know that these 1975 bikes, as with, of course, many of the other CCM models, had their engine oil housed in this front down tube of the frame, where it was then pumped around the motor and then back into the chassis. Now, of course, the oil could be topped up and filled through this little filler plug on top of the frame, which was just ahead of the bike's fuel tank. Now, once again, I'm sure you already know that these 1975 CCM fuel tanks were made of fiberglass, and these were always a quite easy way to identify the 75 models by these bright yellow fuel cells, which normally held around 1.5 gallons of gas. But they were certainly light and, of course, functional, although if you were thinking of putting the likes of this old 75 CCM back on the racetrack, then these fiberglass tanks don't take too kindly these days to modern day fuels, but that's not really an issue if you just drain the fuel from the tank after each use. And once again, more evidence of weight saving on these 1975 bikes, with the top and bottom fork yokes made from magnesium and then painted in that 75 gold colour. Now, the bike's seat again was a pretty comfortable place to rest your backside on when you got the chance between the bumps, but at the end of the day, this is still a full-blown motocross machine and not an armchair, and rider comfort was not really an issue for a 1970s motocrosser, but these were certainly not the worst seat on an off-road bike in that particular year. Now, the wheels on Rob CCM are a pair of alloy Spanish-made Morad rims, which have been completely rebuilt onto the new magnesium hubs, and then of course finished with a set of Dunlop tyres on both wheels. But again, these were light and very strong, and they could certainly take a lot of punishment from some of those top CCM works riders. Now, of course, you already know that the bike's frame and rear swing arm were designed and built by the legendary Mike Etoff, and then of course these were then chrome plated, although in the years to come CCM would discontinue the chrome plating on their frames and then revert back to simply painting them for future models. But these were excellent chassis on these 75 bikes, and of course top quality. Now, the bike's controls and levers are quality Magura items, with of course their associated covers and control cables. Although the engine kill switch was not mandatory for 1975, but is certainly required these days if you want to race the bike in 20 1921, and you'll certainly need this Ven Hill throttle gasser just to help you control the 36 or so horses that old BSA B50 motor will be pushing out. Although overall this is still another quality restoration by Rob's chief bike restorer, Eric Middleton, and of course you'll have already seen some of Alex's handiwork in the previous video of Rob's 1977 EMC 250 that Eric put together. Although these 75 CCM 500s will always be synonymous with the great racing legend Vic Eastwood, and usually when Vic had these 75 bikes dialed into a particular track, he was just unstoppable. Although it's said that Vic was always demanding changes and improvements to his race bikes, and Alan Clues said that sometimes it was very hard for the company to actually keep pace with his demands, although that's more than likely because he had to have his bikes in tip-top condition and all the latest trick parts up and running whenever Vic Eastwood took to the track. Now 1975 was also the year that Alan Clues and his design team were working on a brand new 5-stroke BSA motor for the CCMs, and we'll take a look at that particular engine in a future video here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. But without doubt, this is another superb CCM specimen from the Rob Hughes collection, and of course we'll be featuring more of Rob's bikes in future videos here on my channel. Now coming up next, we're going to take a walk around this 1979 250 Michael, which was a bike that was built by Keith Ree, and this is Keith's replica of the bike that Neil Hudson rode in that 1979 year. So I do hope you'll all continue to subscribe to my channel to take a look at that next machine. But until then, thanks for your continuing support of my videos on YouTube, and thanks for watching Classic Dirt Bike TV.